Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The Chukwuma estate was dripping with opulence that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast soft golden reflections on polished marble floors, and the scent of imported roses laced the air. Guests in designer gowns laughed and clinked glasses, music flowing softly from a grand piano in the corner of the hall. Nadine Chukwuma, heiress to her father's fortune and every inch the image of wealth, stood at the heart of it all, radiant, untouchable, and dangerously entitled. She tossed her sleek curls and let out a laugh that didn't reach her eyes as her boyfriend, Derek, whispered something into her ear. When a soft hand tapped her shoulder, old, wrinkled, trembling, the shift in mood was immediate. "Madam, please." The maid's voice came gently, breathless with urgency. "That man, are you mad?" Nadine snarled, spinning around. Gasps rose around the room as she raised her leg and delivered a sharp, violent kick to the woman's side. The old maid fell backward, hitting the edge of the buffet table. A glass shattered on the floor. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Ozioma didn't cry out, didn't scream, didn't defend herself. She lay there on the polished floor, breathing shallowly, clutching her side. And then, with trembling lips and unfocused eyes, she began to hum. A soft, haunting melody. Simple, repetitive, beautiful. A lullaby. The sound floated upward, cutting through the judgmental whispers, through Nadine's pounding heartbeat, through the clamor of camera shutters, now capturing the scandal. Nadine stood frozen. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. For a split second, her eyes flickered, narrowing with recognition. That tune, that song, it wasn't the first time she'd heard it. But how could that be? She had never spoken to this maid before, never seen her outside of background chores. Yet the tune was there in her bones, like a memory that didn't belong to her. She blinked away the feeling and rolled her eyes. "Get her out of my sight," she snapped and stormed off as the murmurs turned to murmured scandal. That night, alone in her room, Nadine lay wide awake in her king-sized bed beneath her golden ceiling fan. The laughter from the event had long faded, and even Derek had retired after a lazy goodnight kiss. But Nadine stared at the ceiling, her fingers twitching against her satin bedsheet. The tune haunted her. She could hear it again and again, the simple hum threading through the silence. In her mind's eye, it merged with faint images. A woman in a dark room, lit by candlelight, humming that same melody as she rocked something in her arms. A baby? She sat up abruptly, shaking her head. "It's nothing. Just a stupid coincidence." But her chest ached, and her hands felt cold. Her eyes drifted to the mirror on her wardrobe. She stood, walked over, and slowly pulled down her nightdress at the shoulder. The crescent-shaped birthmark stared back at her from the curve of her shoulder. Same as always. But tonight, for the first time, it looked like a question she didn't know how to answer. The next morning, Nadine looked tired. Her usual sharp eyeliner and bronzed glow couldn't hide the unrest in her eyes. As she sat at the breakfast table drizzling honey on pancakes she barely touched, Clarissa walked in, elegant as ever in a silk robe, sipping detox tea. "Rough night?" she asked lightly, not looking up. Nadine didn't answer. She was still thinking about the maid, that lullaby, and the dream. It had returned again, clearer this time. A woman sat barefoot on the floor, rocking a baby wrapped in a faded shawl, softly singing the same song. There were no walls, just curtain sheets, cracked cement, and flickering candlelight. She felt the warmth of the woman's arms, the ache of her tears, the love in her voice. And then she awoke, crying, something she hadn't done in years. Clarissa eyed her daughter carefully. "You're not still thinking about that woman, are you?" Nadine looked up sharply. "You know her?" Clarissa laughed, too quickly. "One of the old ones. They rotate these cleaners all the time. She was probably drunk or mentally ill. Don't dwell on it." She turned the page of her newspaper. Nadine pushed her plate away. She stood, paced. But she sang something. It wasn't just anything. It was the same lullaby I've heard in my dreams since I was a kid. Clarissa slowly lowered her paper. Her voice was firmer now. Dreams are nothing but thoughts in chaos. You were a child when I adopted you. Those early memories come with odd attachments. But that woman is no one. Don't give her power. Nadine didn't respond. Her fingers brushed her shoulder again, that same spot where the birthmark curved like a crescent moon. Clarissa's jaw tightened when she saw it. Nadine didn't notice. By afternoon, the mansion was buzzing again. Derek texted about a new beach villa in Cape Verde he wanted Nadine to sponsor. Nadine barely replied. Her mind was still drifting. She walked down a hallway she rarely visited, the wing where the staff lived. The scent of disinfectant and old soap filled the air. Her heels clicked against the tiles until she stopped in front of a closed door. Room 12A, live-in maid's quarters. She lifted her hand to knock, but stopped. What would she say? Why do I know your voice? Why do I feel like I've heard your heartbeat before? Instead, she turned and walked away, heart pounding. In her room that night, she heard it again, that same lullaby. But this time, it wasn't from memory or dream. Somewhere, faintly through the walls, someone was humming it again. Years earlier, 25 to be exact, the world looked very different for Ozioma. Back then, she wasn't a maid. She was 24, full of hope, and working long shifts cleaning rooms at Rising Palms Hotel in Enugu. She had a slow smile and wide eyes that still believed in love. That night, as she refilled the minibar in the presidential suite, a man walked in. Leonard Chakuma. He was younger then, in his early 30s, handsome, sharp, already dressed in wealth like it was part of his skin. She tried to excuse herself, but he smiled kindly, told her to relax. He asked her name. She stuttered. Ojoma. He said it like a song. One conversation became laughter, and one drink turned into a shared bottle of wine. He called her beautiful, said he liked simple women, real women. That night, Leonard didn't just sleep with Ozioma. He made her believe, for a fleeting moment, that she mattered. But by morning, the suite was empty, the sheets cold. The only thing he left behind was the echo of his promises and a business card that would lead to a deadline. Ozioma stood in the hallway, staring at his door for hours. The other staff whispered, some laughed. Men like that don't stay, one older housekeeper told her. She smiled like it didn't hurt. But when her period didn't come for 2 months, she knew her life was about to change forever. Fired shortly after her pregnancy started showing, because no one wanted a careless woman on the hotel floor, she packed her few things, left the city, and returned to the slums of Nkana West. With no parents and no partner, Ozioma began the hardest chapter of her life. She gave birth alone in a neighbor's room with only torn wrappers for sheets and hot water boiled over a charcoal stove. The baby girl was small, quiet, but her eyes opened wide at the sound of Ozioma's voice. She named her Nadine, hope in her own tongue. Each night, she wrapped Nadine in the only shawl she owned and sang to her. The same lullaby every time. My sunshine, my light, I'll hold you through the night. The words came naturally, like they were born with her. Ozioma couldn't afford diapers, but she wrapped clean cloth. She couldn't afford formula, so she breastfed longer than usual. And through it all, she prayed. She prayed that somehow, one day, her baby would have the life she never did. She didn't know that a woman named Clarissa was already planning to ensure that would never happen. Life after Nadine's birth became a delicate war between love and survival. Every day, Ozioma rose before sunrise, strapped Nadine to her back, and went from one street to another looking for laundry to wash, floors to scrub, and gutters to clear. Her fingers stayed pruned and sore from water. Her back ached from carrying her baby through marketplaces, but she never stopped. At night, she would lay a wrapper on the cracked floor of her single-room dwelling, place Nadine gently beside her, and light a stub of candle wax. As she rocked her baby to sleep, she hummed the lullaby that had now become more than just a melody. It was her strength, her prayer, her survival. She never had enough money for food, and most nights, she fed Nadine while ignoring the growling emptiness in her own stomach. But no matter how dark things became, the lullaby remained a light. She never cursed Leonard, never hated the child. She simply whispered to the heavens, if you're watching, let her live a life better than mine. The neighbors began to whisper. Some pitied her, others mocked her. Born without a husband. Who will marry her now, they'd say at community taps and behind broken window slats. Yet Ozioma didn't flinch. She carried her shame the same way she carried her baby. On her back, close to her heart, protected at all costs. She refused to sleep with men for help, refused to abandon her child, refused to beg Clarissa or Leonard. She tried once to call Leonard, using a phone borrowed from a food vendor. But the number on his card was disconnected. She wrote letters, she never had an address to send. After a while, she stopped trying and focused on what she could do. Raise her child in love. At night, when thunder cracked the sky and rats scurried in the ceiling, she would rock Nadine close to her chest and sing louder than the storm. My sunshine, my light, the song softened Nadine's tears and Ozioma's. And then, one fateful day, everything changed. A woman from the government, dressed neatly in a starched white blouse and carrying a clipboard, knocked on her wooden door. "We're from Child Welfare," she said sharply. "We've had reports of unsafe living conditions for a minor." Ozioma's world shook. She begged them not to come inside, but they pushed through. They saw her mat, her broken windows, the pot of Gary soaking in cold water. "You can't keep a child like this," the woman said. Ozioma fell to her knees, crying. She explained how she washed, cleaned, worked endlessly. She pleaded, "She has never gone hungry. She sleeps in my arms every night. She knows my voice." But her tears meant nothing. Two men came in, large, cold, unfeeling. One of them yanked Nadine from a corner. She screamed. Ozioma leapt forward. "Please. She's all I have." The men shoved her down. Nadine cried as they carried her away, arms outstretched. "Mama, Mama." The door slammed shut behind them. And just like that, the lullaby stopped. The call to social services wasn't a concerned neighbor's action. It was Clarissa's. Sharp, wealthy, and bred to command, Clarissa had eyes everywhere. The moment she learned Leonard had a brief affair with a hotel maid, a nobody, and that the woman had a child, she made her move. To Clarissa, it wasn't just about the scandal. It was about power, control, legacy. Leonard was rising, and she would not let some barefoot girl and her child ruin her dream of becoming Madame Chakuma. She never confronted Leonard about it. She didn't cry or scream. Instead, she hired a private investigator, located Ozioma, and began to quietly destroy her. She blacklisted her from the hotel chain, paid off employers to reject her, and then, when she realized the child was still with her, she dialed her connections in child services and made sure the report sounded authentic. Dirty water, unsafe dwelling, single mother. Her lies were polished and believable. And when the child was taken, Clarissa smiled to herself, calm, calculated, victorious. But Clarissa didn't stop there. With the child in custody and Ozioma left howling in the slums, she visited the orphanage a week later, feigning sympathy. "My husband and I, we can't have children," she told the director with practiced tears. "We heard about the little girl. We'd love to give her a home." With forged documents, a fake background story, and a donation that made the director's eyes gleam, Clarissa walked out holding Nadine in her arms, the same baby she had stolen through power and deceit. She never told Leonard the truth. Instead, she spun a sweet story. She was abandoned. No one wanted her. We'll give her the world. Leonard, too busy building an empire, barely questioned her. He looked at the baby's curious eyes, felt some faint connection, and agreed. Clarissa had won. Ozioma was erased. The baby was renamed, rebranded, and repackaged into the perfect child of the Chakuma dynasty. Yet Clarissa couldn't erase everything. She noticed the birthmark. She nearly froze the first time she bathed Nadine and saw it, that small crescent on the shoulder. It was the same mark the baby had in the investigator's photos. She almost panicked, but then decided to twist it into a unique mark of blessing, and made Nadine wear backless gowns as she grew older to show it off like royalty. Privately, she trained Nadine into arrogance, taught her never to say sorry, never to serve, never to look twice at those below. "You are not like them," she often whispered, combing her hair. "You were born for gold." She believed if Nadine grew cold enough, ruthless enough, She would never go searching. But deep down, Clarissa feared one thing, the lullaby. Because if it ever returned, it could undo everything she had spent 2 decades building. Ozioma lay curled on her mat that night. No baby in her arms, no sound in the room, but the faint drip of water from her cracked ceiling. Her hands trembled as they clutched the edge of Nadine's blanket, the one left behind by mistake during the rush. She hadn't eaten since morning, hadn't moved in hours. Her eyes were dry not because she had no tears left, but because the pain was so raw it had numbed her completely. The neighbors whispered outside, some in pity, others in gossip. A few tried to knock on her door. She didn't respond. The woman who had sung through storms, who had danced barefoot in markets just to buy rice, who had kissed her daughter's forehead every night, had become a statue of grief. And then, without warning, she began to sing. Her voice cracked. "My sunshine, my light, I'll hold you through the night." She sang it again, and again, until the neighbors cried, until even the wind stilled, until the song wasn't just a lullaby, it was a burial. The next day, Ozioma packed her things, or what little remained. She burned her old clothes, tore down the cloth on the windows, and wrapped Nadine's shawl like sacred fabric. There was nothing left for her in that town, no child, no job, no name. But she wasn't ready to die. Not yet. She wandered from village to village, then city to city, taking jobs as a cleaner, a dishwasher, a gardener. She never stayed long. Each time she saw a girl around Nadine's age, her heart stopped. And each time she heard a certain song playing, she had to walk away. Her pain became her shadow. But she never forgot her daughter's name. She whispered it in prayers. In time, she found God again. Not the God of preachers, but the quiet God who listened when no one else did. The God who saw her kneeling with a baby on a mat and did not judge. 22 years passed. Then one day, she saw a familiar face in a magazine. A young woman, tall, beautiful, proud, standing beside Chief Leonard Chukwuma. Her name, Nadine. And there it was, clear as daylight, a faint crescent-shaped birthmark peeking through her sleeveless dress. Ozioma dropped the magazine and began to cry. Not with the grief of loss this time, but with the ache of reunion. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter was thriving. And though she couldn't run into her arms, she could get close. She found an agency that staffed elite homes. She used a different name. And when the offer came, cleaner at the Chukwuma mansion, she didn't hesitate. That's how Ozioma came to the house, years later, silent, unseen, and that's how she ended up at the party on the floor, kicked by her own daughter, as the lullaby escaped her lips once more. The morning after the incident, the Chukwuma mansion was unusually quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Nadine sat on the edge of her bed, legs crossed beneath her, still in her satin robe, staring blankly at her phone. Her fingers hovered over social media apps, terrified of what might be trending, but too proud to check. The scene from the night before replayed in her head in unsettling detail, the tap on her shoulder, the maid's shaking voice, her own fury, and then the kick. But it wasn't the violence that haunted her. It was what happened after, the soft humming of that lullaby. It wasn't just a song. It had roots, threads that pulled her inward, made her chest tighten, as if her very bones remembered it. She had heard it before. Not in this life, perhaps, but in dreams, scattered images of a woman rocking her beside candlelight, eyes puffy from crying, voice trembling with love. Nadine had always dismissed those dreams as fantasy. But now they clawed at her. She stared at her reflection, her hand once again brushing her shoulder where the crescent birthmark lay, once cute, now terrifying. Downstairs, Ozioma was back in her quarters, lying on the thin mattress that served as her bed. Her side ached from the kick, but the pain was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. She hadn't told anyone what she suspected. She hadn't spoken the name aloud. But every time she saw Nadine walk by in silk gowns, wearing perfume that cost more than her yearly pay, she saw her baby again, the tiny girl who once clung to her finger and fell asleep to her heartbeat. And now, that same girl had kicked her in public like dirt beneath her feet. Yet Ozioma hadn't screamed, hadn't shouted. She had only hummed the lullaby, the one she had sung for years in mourning, not realizing it would rise from her like a reflex. And when Nadine flinched, when her face twisted in that moment of recognition, Ozioma knew. She didn't need a DNA test. She didn't need a file. That song lived in Nadine's bones. But the time wasn't right. Not yet. Ozioma wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to her duties. If she was going to reclaim her daughter, she'd do it with grace. Not scandal. Clarissa, however, was fuming. In her private study, she paced like a lioness whose territory had been invaded. She had watched the entire scene from the top of the staircase the night before, hiding behind the banister. She had heard the lullaby, had seen Nadine hesitate, and she had known instantly who the maid was. Her deepest fear had arrived. Ozioma was supposed to be dead in memory, erased from existence. But now she was back. Worse, in the house. And worse still, Nadine had responded to her. That could not happen again. Clarissa knew what was at stake. If Nadine found out the truth about the adoption, about the manipulation, about the betrayal, she would lose everything. Her image, her hold on Leonard, and her daughter. She needed to act swiftly, ruthlessly. Clarissa picked up her phone and called a trusted staff member. "We need to get that maid out of this house," she said coldly. And this time permanently. Nadine sat in the garden that afternoon, the sun bright above her, but her soul weighed down with questions. Derek had shown up that morning with tulips, her favorite, and a cocky smile, asking if she was over the drama yet. She barely responded. Her mind was clouded, not just by Ozioma's presence and the haunting lullaby, but by a growing suspicion that had nothing to do with lullabies and everything to do with lies. Derek had been acting differently lately, more distant, more demanding. He had started asking for larger amounts of money for vague investments, and she had begun to notice strange charges on her accounts. The night before, after the kick, when she sat alone at the foot of her bed, she had scrolled through his tagged photos online. One stood out. Derek, at a lounge she didn't know about, smiling a little too closely beside a girl in a red dress. She'd never seen that girl before, but something in her gut twisted. Nadine had lived a life of glamour and power, but her heart had always longed for genuine love, a love she thought Derek gave. Now even that felt tainted. Ozioma saw him too, that same day, outside the mansion gate, arms wrapped around a different girl as he leaned against his Benz. She paused on the path with a basket of folded towels, hidden by the curve of the hedge, watching him laugh and kiss the girl's cheek. Her heart didn't just break for Nadine. It flared in protective rage. How dare he lie to her child? How dare he stand in her daughter's life like a shield, when he was the very storm she needed shelter from? But she couldn't confront him. Not yet. She knew he would deny it. That Nadine wouldn't believe her. Not after what had already happened. Instead, she turned and hurried back to the mansion, eyes stinging, praying for timing. When she passed Nadine by the corridor, she wanted to speak. But Nadine looked right through her, eyes glazed, heart guarded. Ozioma nodded gently and walked away. She would wait. Just a little longer. The truth always had its day. Derek, meanwhile, was already planning his next move. He had grown used to Nadine's money, her connections, her name. He liked being in photos, the whispers of people saying he was the future Chukwuma's son-in-law. What he didn't like was the growing distance in her eyes, the way she looked at him now, as if she saw something else. He needed to secure his grip again. That night he prepared a little plan, a stage story about a business investor in Ghana that needed urgent flight tickets, and a small loan of 3 million Nigerian nairas. Nothing major, nothing Nadine wouldn't pay. He came to her room with wine and smooth words. But Nadine didn't melt. She didn't even sip the wine. Instead, she stared at him with tired eyes and asked a simple question. "Do you believe dreams mean anything?" Derek blinked, confused. "What kind of dreams?" "Ones that feel like memories," she said. He laughed nervously. "Babe, what are you talking about?" She looked away, heart still humming the tune only one woman seemed to know. Clarissa watched the pieces of her world slowly drift toward collapse, and she knew one thing with certainty. Ozioma had to go. This time, permanently. No warnings. No confrontations. Just silent elimination. The woman was a ghost from a life she had buried long ago. A poor, helpless hotel maid who was never meant to resurface. Yet now not only had she returned, she had planted herself inside the mansion like a ticking bomb. Clarissa could no longer sleep. Every time she passed Ozioma in the hallway, her hands itched. The memories from years ago, the forged papers, the fake adoption, the hushed-up lies, all rattled like bones in her closet. She opened her jewelry safe and smiled coldly. Inside was her favorite diamond ring, the one Leonard had given her on their second anniversary. Without a second thought, she slipped it into a small pouch and slid it under a pile of cleaning rags in Ozioma's cart. Then, she called the head of household security. "There's a thief among the maids," she said calmly. "I need it handled quickly and quietly." Later that afternoon, while Ozioma was scrubbing the baseboards of the guest lounge, 2 guards approached her. "Madame Clarissa's ring is missing," one said, eyes narrowed. "And someone reported seeing you around her dressing room this morning." Ozioma blinked in confusion. "I've never entered her room," she said truthfully. "I've never even been upstairs since last week." But the guards didn't care. They opened her cart, found the pouch, opened it. The diamond ring glittered in the sunlight. The staff gasped. "It's not mine," she said. Her voice was soft, shaking. But it didn't matter. She was grabbed by both arms and dragged through the corridor as the staff gathered to whisper and point. Her scarf fell to the floor. Her shoes slipped off. But she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She only whispered to herself the lullaby, just like she did when they took her baby. "My sunshine, my light." The sound carried through the hallway like a soft breeze. Then it happened. Just as she was being pulled past Nadine, her blouse shifted, and her left shoulder was exposed. Nadine, who had been walking down the stairs, froze. Her eyes locked on the crescent-shaped birthmark. Time slowed. Her breath caught. She stared. She took a step closer. No, it couldn't be, but it was. Her own shoulder began to burn, like the mark recognized its twin. "Wait," she whispered. Then louder, "Wait." The guard stopped. Nadine ran forward, grabbed Ozioma's arm, turned it slightly, and gasped. The mark matched. Identical. She turned to the guards. "Let her go." They hesitated. "I said let her go," she screamed. They dropped their hands. Ozioma stumbled forward. Nadine stared into her eyes. "How do you have that mark?" she whispered. Ozioma looked at her, pain trembling in her expression, and softly began to hum. Nadine stood completely still, her hand hovering inches from the woman's exposed shoulder, her fingers trembling as though they had touched fire. The crescent birthmark wasn't similar, it was identical. Same curve, same size, same faint blur along the edge. It was the same one she had seen on herself in the mirror since she was a child. The mark Clarissa used to say was God's signature of royalty. But this wasn't a royal stamp, it was a link, a connection, a truth. The woman, Ozioma, looked up at her, eyes brimming with unshed tears, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. In that moment, Nadine's breath left her chest like a punch to the lungs. Her ears buzzed. The hum from earlier, the lullaby, returned like a whisper on the wind. The guards were still holding Ozioma. "Let her go," Nadine said again, her voice sharp, commanding. They released her instantly. Ozioma stumbled to her knees, but Nadine knelt with her, for the first time in her life, seeing the maid not as a servant, but as someone with answers she desperately needed. The staff stood around in shocked silence, but Nadine's mind was a thunderstorm. Questions battered her. Why do we have the same mark? Why do I know her voice? Why do I feel like I've heard her cry before? She reached for Ozioma's hand slowly, like touching something fragile and divine. "Tell me the truth," she said, voice shaking. "Do you know me?" Ozioma didn't speak. Instead, she did the only thing she knew how to do. She hummed again, soft, warm, broken, the lullaby that had lived in Nadine's dreams her entire life. Nadine choked back a sob. The memory flooded her. That same song, the rhythm of arms rocking her, the warm scent of palm oil and ash, the sound of soft weeping in the dark. It was real. The dream wasn't a dream. It was a memory. You sang that to me, she whispered. Ozioma finally nodded, just once, then lowered her head as if ashamed to stand in the truth. Nadine rose slowly and turned to the guards. Who authorized this search? She asked. They looked at each other nervously. Madame Clarissa, one of them muttered. The name hit her like a slap. Clarissa appeared moments later, flanked by 2 staff members, her heels clicking against the tile, her face composed like stone. What is going on here? She demanded, but her voice cracked ever so slightly. Nadine stared at her, not as a daughter looking at a mother, but as a woman staring down a stranger. You accused her of theft, Nadine said, voice calm but seething. Clarissa straightened. My ring was in her things. The guards, she didn't take it, Nadine interrupted. You planted it. You wanted her gone. You always want people gone when they threaten your version of the world, don't you? Clarissa's lips parted, but nothing came out. Nadine stepped between her and Ozioma. Not this time. Her gaze was icy. Not her. The gathered staff were still as statues. Clarissa glanced down at the birthmark, the one she had once hidden behind couture, and for the first time in 20 years she felt afraid. They sat in the drawing room, just the 2 of them, Nadine and Ozioma, in a silence so thick it felt like grief. The air was heavy. The light through the tall windows dimmed, as if the house itself knew something sacred was being unveiled. Nadine hadn't spoken since she ordered tea for the woman. She just sat across from her, observing her like a long-lost map, as if every wrinkle on her face held coordinates to answers she wasn't ready to find. Ozioma's eyes were steady but watery, and she didn't touch the tea. Her fingers were clasped together tightly in her lap. Nadine finally broke the silence with a single trembling question. Who are you? Ozioma exhaled shakily. You already know, she whispered. Nadine's eyes filled with tears. Say it. There was a pause, long, almost holy. I am your mother, Ozioma said quietly. Your real mother, the one they took you from. The word struck Nadine like thunder. Her shoulders jerked as though the air had been sucked from the room. All her life, she had been told she was adopted from an orphanage, that she was unwanted, forgotten, rescued. Clarissa never gave her more than that. Leonard rarely spoke about it, and Nadine had never questioned it because she was clothed in luxury, shielded by wealth. But in this moment, all of that meant nothing. Why didn't you say anything? She asked, her voice breaking. Ozioma looked down at her trembling hands. Because I wasn't sure you were ready. And maybe I wasn't either. I just needed to see you. To know you were okay. That you were still alive. That the song I used to sing still lived inside you. Nadine covered her face with her hands. The sobs came uninvited, ugly, full, shaking sobs. I kicked you, she whispered between breaths. I kicked my own mother. Ozioma stood and crossed the room slowly, gently kneeling before her. She touched Nadine's hand, not like a servant, but like a mother reclaiming her child. You didn't know, she said. And I forgive you. I forgave you the moment I heard you speak. Nadine reached for her, and for the first time since she was 2 years old, mother and daughter embraced. The hug wasn't graceful or elegant. It was raw, trembling, full of years stolen, pain buried, and love rediscovered. They stayed that way for what felt like forever. A billionaire's daughter and the maid she kicked. Only now the truth had rewritten their titles. As they finally pulled apart, Nadine's voice cracked. Clarissa lied to me, didn't she? Ozioma nodded. About everything. Nadine's eyes narrowed. Then it's time I heard the full story. No more lies. No more silence. I want to know everything. Ozioma returned to the maid's quarters that night and retrieved the only belongings she had kept hidden since she arrived at the mansion. A small rusted metal box, wrapped in layers of old cloth, tucked beneath a loose floorboard beneath her bed. Her hands trembled as she opened it, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. Inside were just a few items. A folded photo of a newborn baby wrapped in a blue shawl, Ozioma holding her with sunken cheeks, but bright eyes. A copy of a diary entry she wrote the night Nadine was taken, the lullaby, scribbled in fading ink, verse after verse, and the original shawl itself, the one Nadine had been wrapped in the day she was born. Ozioma had kept it all. Through poverty, through pain, through decades of silence. She carried the box gently through the house, tears staining her cheeks, and placed it into Nadine's hands with reverence. "This is the truth," she said. "This is our story." Nadine sat on her bed, cradling the box like it was made of glass. She opened the diary entry first. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "They came today. Government men. Said I was unfit. Took her screaming. I screamed too. My baby. My Nadine. I didn't even get to say goodbye." Nadine wept. Then she picked up the photo, cracked along the edges, but still clear. Her baby eyes looked straight into the lens. And beside her, Ozioma's face, tired, scared, but shining with love. It was proof, not only of blood, but of bond. She reached for the lullaby sheet next and read the words. She could already hear the melody in her head. It was never just a dream. It was never fiction. It was memory. Her soul had remembered what her mind had forgotten. And now, the past had come to collect its due. "I need to speak to him," she said softly, fire rising in her chest. "To Leonard. I need to hear what he knew, and what he never told me." At that moment, Clarissa barged in, her face red, eyes wild. She had heard everything. "How dare you?" she snarled at Ozioma. "You think you can come into this house and undo everything I built?" Nadine stood, fierce. "What exactly did you build? A throne of lies? A prison made of secrets?" Clarissa's voice cracked. "I saved you," she shouted at Nadine. She had nothing. She was nothing. But Nadine stepped between her and Ozioma, shielded her with her body. "She gave me life." "What did you give me?" "Deception." Clarissa stared at the two of them, the birthmark, the resemblance, the song, and for the first time, she realized she had already lost. Nadine didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Leave us." And when Clarissa finally turned and walked away, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of power. Because for the first time, mother and daughter were no longer divided by lies. Leonard Chukwuma arrived home later that evening, oblivious to the emotional tidal wave that had erupted in his mansion. It was his habit to stay at one of his offshore properties during the week, returning only on weekends to attend business dinners or show face at family events. Clarissa had long ensured that the affairs of the home remained his last priority. He walked into the living room, briefcase in hand, greeted by a chilling silence. The atmosphere felt charged, like something sacred had been broken open. Nadine sat at the far end of the room with a photo in her hand. Across from her stood Ozioma, not in her uniform, but in her plain wrapper and blouse, dignified, silent, but unafraid. "Leonard," Nadine called softly, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." The tone of her voice made him pause. He turned and saw her tear-streaked face, the photo trembling in her fingers. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes flicking from her to Ozioma and back again. "Why is the maid here without her uniform?" Ozioma didn't speak. She simply stepped forward and handed Leonard the same rusted metal box. Nadine stood by her, a hand resting on her shoulder. "Look inside," she said, her voice clipped with control. Leonard opened the box, slowly. He picked up the photo first, and froze. He remembered the young woman in the image. He remembered her eyes, her voice, the scent of that hotel room in Enugu 25 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. "Ozioma," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Nadine nodded. "Yes. And that baby is me." Leonard's hand trembled as he clutched the edge of a nearby chair. No, that's not possible. Clarissa told me." He stopped, eyes wide, memories rushing back like an avalanche. Clarissa had said the girl disappeared, that the baby was found in a shelter, that adoption had saved them from scandal. "She lied," Nadine said firmly. "She lied about everything." Ozioma stepped forward now. "You left me," she said softly. "But it wasn't just your fault. Clarissa made sure we never found each other again. She stole everything, my child, my voice, my place." Leonard slowly sat, his body unable to hold the weight of what he was learning. His world spun. For years, he'd lived in luxury, building an empire, accepting Clarissa's narrative without question. He thought the past was buried, but here it was, living, breathing, weeping before him. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he whispered. "Because she didn't want you to know," Nadine said. "Because knowing would have meant loving someone else more than her." Leonard stared at Ozioma, truly seeing her now, the woman she had become despite poverty, the fierce love in her eyes, the pain of years spent in silence. He buried his face in his hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. The guilt pierced deeper than any business loss or scandal ever had. "You didn't just lose a child," Nadine said, voice breaking. "You made her suffer in your house, as a maid. And I kicked her." Leonard looked up then, his face crumpled, tears falling freely. "Forgive me," he murmured, not sure to whom he was speaking, the daughter or the woman who raised her with nothing but hope and lullabies. As the emotional dust settled within the Chukwuma household, Nadine retreated to her room, trying to make sense of the world she had always known, now shattered into pieces. But amidst the emotional fog, another familiar, unwelcome scent lingered. Derek. Her boyfriend had been texting her nonstop since the public humiliation earlier in the week, when she had refused to accompany him to a club event. Derek, ever the manipulator, was now suddenly affectionate, calling her queen again and pretending to be supportive. He knocked on her bedroom door that evening, a bouquet of flowers in hand and his lips stretched in that too-polished smile. "Babe, I heard you've been going through something emotional. I'm here for you always," he cooed. Nadine studied him through different eyes now, the same eyes that had been blind to his arrogance, blind to the way he always reached for her purse before the bill, blind to how he disappeared for hours, then returned smelling of cheap perfume and guilt. Ozioma had tried to warn her, and she had kicked her for it. But Nadine had changed. This time, instead of falling into his embrace, she walked slowly to her vanity and opened her drawer. Inside was a small flash drive, one Ozioma had quietly slipped into her hand 2 nights ago, saying, "When you're ready." Nadine inserted it into her laptop. The video played, grainy footage captured discreetly on the mansion's outdoor CCTV. Derek entering the compound with a curvy, giggling woman in tight jeans. Another clip followed. Derek passionately kissing the woman against the gate wall, then adjusting his shirt before walking inside like nothing had happened. Nadine's stomach turned. More images followed, bank alerts forwarded by Ozioma's contact in the accounts department. Money transfers to Derek's personal business from her trust fund account. Nadine felt sick. Her eyes darkened as she turned to face him. "Do you love me, Derek?" she asked, voice flat. He blinked, surprised by the softness. "Of course, babe. You know I do." She played the footage. He froze. Derek's face shifted from confident to stammering within seconds. "It's not what it looks like," he began, but Nadine cut him off. "Save it," she said, walking to the door and opening it. "You're not just a liar. You're a parasite. You used me, and I let you, because I didn't know who I was." Her voice shook now, rising with emotion. "But I know now, and I'm done." Derek tried to touch her arm. She yanked away. "You kicked my real mother out of this house. You helped frame her. You disgust me." She turned to a guard outside the door. "Escort him out. If he comes near me or my family again, call the police." Derek tried to protest, but the guards were swift. Nadine shut the door behind them and sank to the floor, not in grief, but in power. She had reclaimed her voice, her heart, and her mother's honor. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. Clarissa Chukwuma was unraveling, not in public, where her makeup remained immaculate and her speech refined, but in private, behind the mahogany doors of her quarters. The woman who had once ruled over the Chukwuma estate with subtle tyranny and composed cruelty now paced her room in agitation, gripping a glass of untouched wine. Everything was slipping through her fingers. Nadine Leonard, the estate's influence. And worst of all, the truth. The truth that she had spent over 2 decades burying like a rotting seed had now blossomed into something bright, undeniable, and loud. Nadine had not only accepted Ozioma, she had elevated her. Leonard no longer looked at Clarissa with respect, only contempt. Her forged documents, her carefully planned adoption ruse, her years of social control, all at risk. And there was no one left to believe her side. No more favors. No more loyal staff. Even the guards whispered when she passed. Clarissa was drowning, and no one was throwing her a rope. In a last-ditch effort to retain her grip, she met with a long-trusted family lawyer, Mr. Acady, to reassert her power over Nadine's inheritance. She pushed documents forward, estate shares, co-signing privileges, account access, only to have him slide them right back. "I'm sorry, madam," he said quietly. "You no longer have legal jurisdiction over Nadine's finances. Everything reverts to her on her 25th birthday, which, according to our records, is next month. Unless Mr. Chukwuma revokes it earlier, which he has the power to do." Clarissa's mouth fell open. "Revoke?" she echoed. Mr. Acady nodded. "He's already in motion, in light of new discoveries." Clarissa clenched her fists. "What about me?" "I was her mother," she snapped. But the lawyer's eyes were gentle and cold. "You were a woman who played mother. Now the real one is here." Back at the mansion, Leonard called a private family meeting. In the great room where decisions of legacy had always been made, he stood at the head of a table with Nadine and Ozioma seated beside him. Clarissa was called in last. When she entered, Leonard's voice was calm. "Clarissa, I appreciate all you've done to maintain this house over the years. But I now understand the cost of that stability, and who paid it." Clarissa lifted her chin defiantly. "I did what I had to." Leonard's eyes burned. "No, you did what served you. And in the process, you turned this house into a lie." With that, he handed her a letter. An official notice revoking all estate powers she once held. "You may stay in the guest wing until further notice," he said. "But you're no longer a decision-maker here." Clarissa took the paper, her hands shaking. She stared at Ozioma, her lips curling. But Ozioma didn't smirk. She just nodded politely, as if to say, "You built a palace on my tears. Now it leaks." The sun had barely risen when Nadine stepped out of the mansion gates for the first time without her driver or entourage. She wore a simple blouse, jeans, and flat sandals, unfamiliar comfort clothes, but intentional. She carried a small basket of groceries and took a commercial tricycle to the outskirts of town, toward a low-income neighborhood where the air smelled like firewood, kerosene, and effort. It was the address Ozioma had scribbled for her, a one-room apartment in a narrow compound with faded blue walls and rust-stained gutters. As she stepped out of the kiki and approached the compound, Nadine felt her heart thud in a way no mansion or fashion show had ever stirred it. Her knock on the door was hesitant, almost shy. Ozioma opened it with surprise, but said nothing. Her face was tired, her wrapper faded, but her smile, soft, genuine, and forgiving, made Nadine's throat tighten. "I brought soup ingredients," Nadine whispered awkwardly. Ozioma opened the door wider. "Then come and cook it, my daughter." Inside, the room was humble, painfully clean, and filled with warmth Nadine didn't know she had longed for. A mat was neatly rolled in the corner, a single window let in bright light, and the faint scent of Dettol soap clung to the air. On one shelf stood a chipped photo frame, a faded baby picture inside. Nadine walked to it, trembling. "That's me?" she asked. Ozioma nodded, setting a kettle on a kerosene stove. Nadine touched the glass. "You kept this all these years?" The old woman gave a sad smile. "I had nothing else. Just that photo, your shawl, and the song I sang every night hoping the wind would carry it to wherever you were." Nadine turned to face her. "Why didn't you ever come for me? Or tell someone?" Ozioma's eyes shimmered. "I tried, Nadine. Clarissa made sure I had no job, no access, no dignity. She said she'd ruin me forever if I dared show my face." Nadine lowered her gaze. "And I believed her lies too. I thought you were a thief. I called you names." Ozioma gently touched her hand. "You were only doing what you were taught. But now you're unlearning it." They sat on the mat to eat. Nadine watched as Ozioma stirred the soup with quiet grace, her hands aged but steady. They shared small stories, laughter, and long silences heavy with realization. Nadine noticed how Ozioma prayed before eating, her words soft but intentional. For the first time, Nadine ate without trying to impress, without performing. "I wish you had been there," Nadine whispered. "For my first heartbreak, my first period, my school plays. I wish I had known you were alive." Ozioma's voice broke as she replied, "I was alive, my child. But I was buried under another woman's lies." They stayed together until night fell, the generator humming from the next compound. Nadine curled up on the mat beside Ozioma, resting her head on her shoulder like a child finding her way home for the first time. Ozioma began humming again, the lullaby. Nadine joined in. Their voices, one wounded, one awakening, blended into something new, a harmony forged by blood, grief, and a bond that had waited decades to be reborn. 3 days later, Nadine stood in front of an audience, not of camera flashes or red carpets, but of journalists, family friends, company executives, and long-time staff of the Chukwuma estate. A press dinner had been hastily organized at her request, and though many expected a product launch or brand announcement, no one anticipated the revelation Nadine had prepared. As she stepped onto the small stage in the estate's garden courtyard, all eyes fell on her. She wore a sleek but simple wine-colored gown, no jewelry, no dramatic makeup. Only a crescent-shaped birthmark visible just under her sleeveless shoulder. "I called you here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Not for business, but for truth." A few heads tilted in confusion. Nadine glanced at Ozioma, seated in the front row, her hands folded gently on her lap, and drew strength from her mother's calm presence. "I was raised by a woman I believed was my mother," Nadine continued. "But recently I found out the truth. My real mother was the maid I publicly humiliated. She sang me a lullaby, and my heart remembered her even when my mind did not." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones tilted for better angles. "Her name is Ozioma," Nadine said, stepping aside. "She is not just a former staff member. She is the woman who birthed me, loved me from a distance, and bore more pain than any mother should." Ozioma did not rise. She simply nodded and smiled, quiet, composed. A few in the audience wiped tears. "I used to think family was about class and bloodlines. Now I know it's about love and sacrifice." Nadine turned her gaze directly to the cameras. "I say this not to shame anyone, but to honor the woman who was shamed, ignored, and erased. From this moment on, Ozioma is no longer a maid in this house. She is the matriarch." And with that, Nadine stepped down, walked to her mother, and held her hand. No further press statement was needed. The silence said enough. Later that night, as the courtyard cleared and cameras faded, Leonard approached Ozioma. For the first time in 25 years, he knelt in front of her. "I failed you," he said hoarsely. "I failed her. I let Clarissa lie to me because I was too weak to seek the truth." Ozioma looked down at the man who had abandoned her. "I don't hate you, Leonard. I just stopped waiting for you." He wept quietly, and she allowed him. "What can I do now?" he asked. Ozioma shook her head. "You already have everything. Power, wealth. I only ask for one thing. Let me stay close to Nadine. Let me love her the way I was never allowed to." Leonard nodded, still kneeling. "Then stay. Stay here in this house. Your house." Ozioma helped him to his feet. Behind them, Nadine watched, her two parents broken and healing, slowly learning what it meant to begin again. Leonard stood alone in his study the next morning, surrounded by walls lined with portraits and accolades that now felt like meaningless echoes of a hollow empire. For over 2 decades, he had believed he had it all: wealth, power, prestige, and a respectable family. But now he saw clearly how the very foundation of his legacy had been built on falsehood. He stared at an old family portrait on the wall, Clarissa's arm possessively around Nadine, while he smiled blandly, unaware of the stolen truth just inches away. He picked up a framed photo from his desk and threw it across the room. Glass shattered, but it didn't relieve the ache in his chest. He had failed them, both Ozioma and Nadine, and he had allowed Clarissa's lies to shape a lifetime of ignorance. How many nights had he passed Ozioma in the hallway without knowing he was walking past his first love? How many times had he laughed with Nadine and never known the song she hummed was a cry for her true mother? He left his study and quietly walked to the guest wing where Ozioma had been temporarily relocated, not as a maid, but now as a guest. He knocked. She opened the door, dressed simply as always, her eyes cautious but kind. Leonard didn't speak at first. He just sat on the edge of the chair and exhaled. "I came to ask you something," he said eventually. "What did you pray for all those years?" Ozioma tilted her head. "I prayed for her. For peace. For a roof that wouldn't leak. For small food in her stomach. And that one day she would know I existed." Leonard swallowed, blinking hard. "I didn't know how strong you were. I thought you'd moved on or disappeared. I didn't even try to find out." Ozioma sat beside him. "You didn't try because you believed what was easy. You thought a woman like me couldn't carry truth. But I did every single day." Leonard nodded, ashamed. "What can I do now to make it right?" Ozioma smiled faintly. "Be a father. A real one. Not a donor of wealth, but a presence. She doesn't need your money. She needs your honesty." Later, Leonard walked into Nadine's room and found her sorting through old childhood drawings. She looked up, startled to see him without a suit, without security, just a man, raw and stripped. "I came to ask for your forgiveness," he said. Nadine held his gaze. "You never hit me. You never abandoned me. But you never asked questions either. You never looked deeper." Leonard nodded. "I didn't know how to be a father, Nadine. Not to you. Not to anyone. But I want to try. Starting today." Nadine set the drawings aside and stood. She embraced him, stiffly at first, then tighter. "Then stay. For once, just stay." As he held his daughter, Leonard realized that wealth could build walls, but love tore them down. And in that embrace, perhaps the real inheritance had just begun. Not stocks, not property, but restoration. Clarissa sat alone in the far end of the Chukwuma estate, confined to the guest wing that now felt more like exile than privilege. The opulence around her, gold-trimmed furniture, custom-painted walls, imported rugs, only mocked her defeat. The world she had carefully curated was slipping from her fingers, and there was no press statement or damage control plan that could rewrite the truth Nadine had delivered to the world. Leonard had severed all financial access. Staff she once ruled with an iron tongue now walked past her without greeting. For decades, she had built her status on manipulation, orchestrating Ozioma's ruin, rewriting Nadine's origin, and burying Leonard's past under luxury and status. Yet now, that very past had returned, alive, breathing, and undoing her silently. And what stung the most wasn't that she was exposed, it was that she wasn't. No one publicly dragged her through scandal. No tabloids carried her name. Nadine had refused to destroy her the way she tried to destroy Ozioma. Instead, Clarissa was left to rot in silence, unspoken, unneeded, and unseen. The very invisibility she once forced on Ozioma was now her curse. She watched from the shadows as Nadine and Ozioma laughed on the balcony, sharing mother-daughter moments she could never buy, fake, or earn. Every smile Nadine gave Ozioma tightened a screw in Clarissa's chest. The girl she had raised, or rather, curated, had now outgrown her. Worse, Nadine now saw through her. Clarissa tried once, in a final act of desperation, to speak with her. "I did it all to protect you," she whispered when Nadine passed by. Nadine paused only briefly. "No, you did it to protect your image. You didn't save me. You stole me." Then she walked away, never looking back. Left alone in the silent hallways, Clarissa finally realized that legacy wasn't built on wealth, or even blood, but on truth. She sat by her vanity mirror, watching her reflection age in real time. She had trained Nadine to wear designer brands and speak with sharp poise, but she never taught her compassion. Ozioma had done that with a lullaby and a prayer. She had tried to erase a mother's love, but failed. And now, that love stood taller than all her lies. Clarissa remained in the mansion, but no longer belonged in it. Her punishment was not prison, but being forgotten. Nadine's world moved forward, while hers stood still. And when she finally whispered to herself, "Maybe I was wrong," there was no applause, no redemption. Just the quiet echo of a woman who lost everything without anyone needing to lift a finger. The sun dipped low over the Chukwuma estate, casting a soft golden hue over the newly renovated garden balcony, where Ozioma and Nadine now spent their evenings. It had become their sacred space. No servants, no press, no interruptions. Just mother and daughter, rediscovering each other day by day. Ozioma now wore modest but dignified gowns provided by Nadine, and her wrinkled hands often reached to tuck a loose braid behind Nadine's ear, like she had done when Nadine was a baby. Nadine no longer craved parties, or Derek's smooth lies, or Clarissa's approval. She craved her mother's cooking, her prayers, her humming. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, it never would, but in its place grew something far more precious. Presence. Every shared moment was a balm. They no longer needed to fill the silence with conversation. Even breathing together felt healing. That night, Nadine lay across Ozioma's lap, gazing up at the stars above. "It's funny," she whispered. "I used to think I was dreaming when I heard that lullaby. Now I know. I was remembering." Ozioma smiled, her fingers gently running through Nadine's hair. "God never let you forget, even when the world tried to make you." Nadine turned to face her. "Sing it again?" Ozioma hummed softly, the melody slow, delicate, and full of history. Nadine joined her, their voices in perfect harmony. When they finished, Nadine said, "It used to make me cry." Ozioma replied, "It used to keep me alive." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that only two people who've survived betrayal together can share. And for the first time in her life, Nadine felt whole. Not rich, not beautiful, not envied. Whole. As the stars shimmered above and the city lights blinked in the distance, Leonard joined them silently with a cup of tea for each woman. He didn't speak much anymore, not out of guilt, but out of reverence. He sat beside them, no longer a controlling figurehead, but a man finally learning to value his daughter and the woman he wronged. Ozioma handed him his tea. Nadine leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, eyes closing slowly. "I'm not afraid of sleeping anymore," she murmured, "because I know who'll be here when I wake up." Ozioma kissed her forehead, tears in her eyes. In that moment, they didn't need apologies or explanations. They had truth. They had time. They had each other. And as the wind gently carried the final note of the lullaby into the night, it no longer sounded like morning. It sounded like home. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.